All right, let's look at what happened on the first season of the Outlander prequel, Blood of My Blood. We begin in 1714 Scotland at Castle Leoch with the death of the laird Red Jacob Mackenzie. His eldest daughter Ellen is taking it particularly hard, having been very close with her father. He even promised she would never have to marry for the sake of the clan. The Mackenzie clan is in upheaval because Jacob never named a successor, meaning the clan will need to vote at the upcoming gathering. They can choose between the eldest son, shrewd but disabled Cullum, younger son, passionate but reckless Dougal, or a different family altogether. Meanwhile, at Castle Leathers, Simon Fraser, known as Lord Lovett, celebrates Red Jacob's passing as their families have long been feuding. His illegitimate son Brian is talked into attending the gathering with cousin Murtagh to spy on the proceedings. At the gathering, Ellen tells Cullum that he has her support. We get a glimpse of young Angus and Rupert already up to no good until advisor Ned Gowan catches them. Mrs. Fitz greets Murtagh and needles him for always pining after Ellen. Brian participates in the games but avoids telling anyone who he is, eventually hiding away in a stable where he runs into Ellen, who is hiding from her many suitors. They hit it off, and she agrees to meet him later at a bridge. The Grants arrive at the gathering, and Malcolm seeks out Ellen, having had a crush on her since childhood. He finds her as she's leaving to meet Brian and insists on walking her home. She walks with him, waiting until he leaves to sneak out again. Ellen and Brian meet on the bridge, and despite realizing their families are feuding, they declare feelings for one another. When they realize Ellen is missing, Dougal assumes the Grants took her and leads a group to get her back, assaulting Malcolm. The Grants' bladier, Henry, puts a stop to the attack. Back at Castle Leoch, Ellen shows up and refuses to say where she's been. All realize that something must be done to make amends with the Grants, and Cullum intends to offer Ellen to the Grants, despite their father's promise. Now we move to 1923 with Julia and Henry Beecham enjoying a picnic by the lake. They talk of their daughter Claire and Julia being with child when a deer on the road causes them to crash. They make it to shore, but as Henry stops to remove a rock from his shoe, he hears Julia scream. Running to her, he sees nothing but the stones, and hears a very familiar buzzing in his ears. The second episode takes us to the year 1917. Henry is a soldier during World War I. Seeing the unimaginable, he writes a letter to whom it may concern. Julia is working in the redaction department for the post office and comes across his letter. She is so moved, she decides to respond, and they begin corresponding regularly. Falling for her hopeful words, Henry adopts the phrase, "sealed with a kiss." After each has a close call with bombs, Henry is put on leave, and they find each other. The chemistry is instant, and they are soon married. Julia helps him with nightmares caused by the war, holding him and quoting her letters to calm him. And eventually they have a baby, Claire. Back in 1714, Julia awakens by the stones, noticing the gemstone gone from her ring. She looks for Henry, marking a stone with SWAK to help him find her. She flags down a passing wagon, and the people end up kidnapping her. She is woken up by Davina Porter and informed she's been sold to Lord Lovett as a maid-servant. She realizes she's in a different time and begs Lovett to allow her to leave and find her husband, but he refuses. Davina warns her not to linger in the laird's presence. Now it's Henry's turn to awaken at the stones. He finds Julia's mark and heads to the town in the distance. In the local pub, he runs into Malcolm Grant, who pays for his ale. While discovering he's in a different time, he overhears a bad deal going down and warns Malcolm as repayment for his kindness. Impressed, Malcolm takes Henry to Beaumont House to meet his father, Laird Isaac Grant. With Henry's information, Grant uncovers shady dealings by his bladier and offers Henry the job. He convinces him that it will be easier to search for his wife with the protection of Clan Grant. Julia begins working as a maidservant, always searching for clues of her location. Lovett hits on her, but she dodges him. Finally, she tries to run away, but is caught by Brian. Despite the women's protests, Brian takes the punishment for her attempted escape. Both Henry and Julia write letters to each other, each declaring their love and vowing to find a way back to each other. A month later, Henry meets with Ned Gowan as the Grants' bladier. Ned offers to help him find the woman he's looking for in exchange for Henry offering the Grants Ellen's hand in marriage. Ellen dreams of Brian, but after waking finds out about her betrothal to Malcolm Grant. She appeals to Colum, offering her counsel, but he says they must both do what's best for the clan. Dougal tells Ellen that it was Colum who promised her hand, making it seem like he wouldn't honor it if he were made laird. She warns him to watch McKinney, who is garnering support. Dougal meets with the Jacobites, promising both loyalty to their cause and Ellen's hand to their leader. Leaving the gathering, Murtagh is upset and tells Brian about Ellen's betrothal. The boys return to Castle Leathers and report the happenings to Lord Lovett. He's upset, feeling like the Mackenzies are trying to turn the Grants against him. He decides to write to Grant, saying disparaging things about Ellen. Davina has realized that Julia is pregnant, offering sympathy and potential solutions to the predicament. In the conversation, Julia realizes that Brian is Davina's son and sees a path to keep her baby safe. Ellen's sister, Jocasta, tells her of Dougal's promise to the Jacobites. When McKinney embarrasses Colum, Ellen encourages him. She remembers back when Colum was injured on a raid with Dougal, and the subsequent fall down the stairs that left him permanently injured. This was the time that Red Jacob had determined that neither of his sons was fit to take his place. After a dire warning from Ned, Ellen appeals to both her brothers, reminding them what is at stake if they don't work together, and she sends Ned back with a new plan. Ellen does her part by pretending to be pleased about her betrothal to Malcolm. At the ceremony, Dougal and Colum announce that they will be joint chiefs, Colum as laird and Dougal as war chieftain. The move garners the support needed, and the clan rallies behind them, with even McKinney pledging loyalty. Ned takes Henry to a brothel where he introduces Una Hay, who may be able to find Julia. Meanwhile, Julia steels herself to do the unthinkable. She decides to lay with Lord Lovett so that he thinks the baby is his own. After the initial dalliance, Julia uses leaves to give herself a rash, making herself less desirable to Lovett. He sends her with Brian to get medicine to fix it. Una Hay thinks she found Henry's person, but it turns out to be another English woman with kind eyes named Seema. Though he refuses her advances, she listens and sympathizes with him. Ellen is furious with both of her brothers when they insist she go through with the marriage to Grant. Colum explains that the clan is broke, and they all have to do what is best for the clan. Instead of the apothecary, Brian takes Julia to Castle Leoch. He asks her to convince Ellen to meet him, using the connection with Mrs. Fitz to gain entry. Julia brings Ellen to the meeting spot, and Brian asks if she is happy about the betrothal. They both declare their feelings for each other once again, planning to meet up at Beltane. But then Dougal shows up and they scatter. Julia agrees to help Brian in exchange for his help getting to Inverness. She's hoping to make it back to the Stones and look for Henry. Isaac Grant sends Henry to collect rent, insisting on a price increase the renters are not prepared for. He devises a lottery that the renters are entered into if they pay the increase, offering the winner a year of no rent, causing the renters to willingly pay the increase. Grant is happy for the funds, but unhappy with the methods, warning Henry not to cross him again. Henry returns to the brothel and asks Seema to just hold him while he sleeps. Back at Leathers, Julia informs Lord Lovett that she is pregnant. He is thrilled, and while she congratulates them, Davina looks apprehensive. Brian is set to leave for Beltane with Julia, but Davina informs him that the seer has been called. Brian now thinks the baby is Lovett's and feels betrayed, leaving Julia behind. Ellen arrives to Beltane with Jocasta and Ned Gowan, where they meet up with Malcolm Grant. At the dance, Brian arrives, and they subtly make plans to meet up later. Ellen is made Queen of Beltane and must choose her king. Though Murtagh and eventually Brian step up for consideration, she wisely chooses Malcolm. Back at Castle Leathers, the seer arrives, and to Lovett's delight, she sees a throne in the baby's future. At Beltane, Ellen makes an excuse to get away from Malcolm, then makes a discretion pact with Jocasta, who is trapped in a loveless marriage. Ellen meets with Brian in an open field of all places, where Murtagh sees them embrace. They move to a more secluded, abandoned chapel. Brian hesitates, concerned for her virtue, but Ellen encourages him, literally saying, "Ruin me." They perform a handfast ritual and then make love for the first time. Drowning his sorrows, Murtagh flirts with Jocasta, who is into it until he drunkenly calls her Ellen. Ouch. At Castle Leathers, Davina attempts to warn Lovett about Julia's baby not being his. But blinded by ambition, he threatens to kill her if she speaks of it again. Ned speaks with Henry about letting go of the past, but Henry isn't willing. Later, Murtagh and Brian both look on as Malcolm and Ellen are honored as King and Queen of Beltane, and Malcolm kisses her. Julia awakens to find her water has broken. The baby is coming. Davina tells Lovett, who sends for a reverend, intending to marry Julia so the baby will be born legitimate. Women from the village arrive to help Julia through her labor. They seem kind and supportive. They even brought cake. But when Davina accuses Julia of seducing the laird and her son, the group turns on her. They call her names and say she must repent. Julia appeals to Davina, asking her to think of how she was treated when birthing Brian. Davina thinks back to the way she was assaulted by Lovett repeatedly, and how the women were equally as harsh with her. She softens and banishes the women from the chamber. Henry has started talking to midwives for any sign of Julia, knowing she would be giving birth soon. During one interview, a midwife finally says she knows of Julia. She claims Julia died in childbirth, and so did the baby, and they were buried somewhere in a pauper's grave. Later, we see Bug paying the woman for lying to Henry, claiming it was Grant's idea. But overcome with grief, Henry has a mental break and returns to the brothel, fully hallucinating that Seema is Julia. She plays along, and they sleep together. Lovett arrives as the women are leaving. He attempts to come in with the Reverend, but Davina stands up to him. Lovett smacks her, and Brian jumps in to defend his mother while the Reverend flees. The baby is born, a little boy. Brian takes the resulting lashes, then goes to see Julia with the baby. He says he may not be his brother, but he will always have a friend in me. Finding out Brian has never celebrated his birthday, Julia grabs the cake and has Brian blow out the candle. A raid happens at the Grants, and Bug accuses the Mackenzies. Malcolm decides to handle it because his father is ill, and he sends Henry to find the culprit. Brian holds a private naming ceremony for baby William before Lovett has him baptized as Simon. Julia is concerned that he will spring a surprise wedding on her at any moment. Murtagh gives Brian the cold shoulder, but when Brian goes after him, Murtagh punches him. They argue about what happened with Ellen, not realizing Lovett's henchman Bollock could overhear. Then Lovett sends the boys to a Jacobite meeting. News of the Grant raid reaches Castle Leoch, and Dougal is nowhere to be found. They decide Ellen should go and find him, using wedding invitations as a cover. Henry meets with Ned, and says he's discovered that the thief was the infamous Rob Roy. He tells Ned his search is over and he plans to leave. Ned warns him that the Grants will hunt him down. Ellen meets with Lady Nairn and finds Dougal at the big Jacobite meeting. Rob Roy is there and makes a big speech. Dougal pledges Mackenzie soldiers and coin to the cause. Ellen is surprised to see Brian there. Then Malcolm shows up with the authorities and everyone scatters. In the chaos, Ellen and Brian share a rather public moment, and Dougal sees them. He strikes down Brian, and Murtagh rides away with Dougal and Ellen. Henry visits Seema one last time. He says goodbye. He plans to get back home to Claire, who still needs him. He makes his way all the way to the stones, but Seema betrayed him and alerted the Grants, who show up and force him to return. As expected, Lovett ambushes Julia with a wedding ceremony, and later, Lovett praises Brian for ensnaring the Mackenzie lass and taking her virtue. Henry is sent to Castle Leoch to demand a purity test on Ellen. After the wedding, Julia and Davina lace Lovett's food with an herb, making him unable to consummate his new marriage. After he gives up, Julia finds a letter on his desk, written by Henry. Ellen is preparing for the purity test. A torturous procedure full of ridiculous notions of things that prove a woman is virtuous, though she's obviously nervous, knowing she has indeed lain with Brian. At Castle Leathers, Brian hears of the test and wants to go to Ellen. Davina tries to stop him and appeals to Julia for help persuading him. Instead, Julia devises a concoction that should fool the examiners, and she and Brian take off for Castle Leoch. Malcolm arrives, but isn't fond of the proceedings, wanting to be sure Ellen knows he didn't want this. Julia gets to Ellen's chambers and helps her apply the concoction. Henry sees Julia in the hall, but thinks he is hallucinating. The exam is performed, and poor Ellen endures it stoically. She is declared virtuous, and after a look of death to her brothers, she exits the room, head held high. Once in her chambers, she thanks Julia and sends her on her way. While sneaking out, Julia hears Henry's voice and yells to him. She only has time to prove it's really her, hope springs eternal, and tell him of William before they are parted again. As the Grants prepare to leave, a messenger arrives with a letter stating that Isaac Grant has died, and Malcolm is now the Laird. Everyone is preparing to gather for Braemar. Julia and Brian convince Lovett that they should all attend. Malcolm runs into his uncle and namesake, who has heard of his father's death and aims to help guide the young Laird. Uncle Malcolm pays Ellen a visit, and while impressed, he does threaten her. At Braemar, Henry briefly gets to meet William before realizing that Lovett thinks the baby is his own. The Earl of Mar gathers the clan chieftains and invites Rob Roy to speak for the Jacobite cause. Lovett attempts to speak with the Earl, but Uncle Malcolm confronts him about the allegations against Ellen, humiliating him in front of everyone. Rob Roy speaks with Dougal about the promises made, and Colum is livid. It gets heated, and Colum demands to know what other secrets Dougal is keeping. Brian and Ellen find ways to flirt out in the open and make plans to meet later. Ned grabs Ellen and takes her to see her brothers. Dougal has revealed her indiscretions to Colum. He threatens to hire assassins to kill Brian, and Ellen agrees to break things off with him if Colum promises not to have him harmed. Brian runs into Henry and is able to fill him in on the situation with Julia. Ellen and Julia meet at the sewing circle, and Julia speaks of the great sacrifice you must make for the ones you love. Brian is waiting for Ellen, but when she shows up, she breaks things off with him, keeping her promise to Colum, but leaving Brian confused and heartbroken. Lovett is on a rampage after his embarrassment, but having had enough, Brian stands up to him. Lovett has him beaten and then disowns him. Henry tells Ned about the Grants lying to him about Julia's death. He asks for help escaping and to deliver a letter to Julia. The men go hunting the next day, and after Murtagh saves his life, Brian realizes there are assassins after him. Henry meets Julia, and they are able to make a plan to escape. In the future, we see Henry and Julia celebrating Claire's second birthday with Uncle Lamb. They discuss plans to visit Scotland, leaving Claire with Lamb for the time. Julia also reveals that she is pregnant. Back in the past, Brian and Murtagh overtake the assassins and discover it was Colum Mackenzie who sent them. As the clans gather for the wedding, Dougal has an awkward encounter with Malcolm's sister Mora when she interrupts his dalliance with her maid. Meanwhile, Jocasta helps Ellen pack and the sisters mend things between them. Later, when Mora criticizes Ellen, Jocasta even stands up for her. We also see Ellen gifted a very familiar set of pearls. Julia makes plans to escape with Davina's help. Brian sneaks in to see Ellen. He declares his love, and Jocasta reveals Colum's betrayal. Ellen says he broke his promise, so that frees her of her own. She goes to see Colum one last time, and gives him the chance to come clean, but he doesn't. When the time for the wedding comes, Ellen is nowhere to be found. The Grants are pissed, and Uncle Malcolm declares that they will not leave without either marriage or blood. The wedding commences, and after the bride walks in, it is revealed to be Mora who will be marrying Dougal, fulfilling the clan's commitment to the Grants. Jocasta goes to Ellen and Brian, who are hiding, updating them and helping them sneak out. On the way out, Ellen and Brian run in to Malcolm. He has words for Ellen and then draws his sword. Brian manages to overpower him, and Malcolm ends up falling by his own sword. Henry meets Julia, and they manage to escape from Castle Leathers. When Lovett realizes that Julia and the baby are gone, he runs into Bug, who is searching for Henry. Ellen and Brian escape to a small hut and find an injured Murtagh. He not only accepts their union, he gifts Ellen the bracelets that Jenny will one day give to Claire. Once healed, Murtagh gives them some alone time, and they celebrate their newfound freedom. Afterwards, they make a blood oath to each other. But at that moment, they see fiery crosses lit across the land, a call of men to arms for the Jacobite rebellion. Henry and Julia have made it to the stones, but they worry about William's ability to travel as they did. But when Bug shows up, Henry grabs Julia's hand and puts it on the stones. And that's where we leave Season 1 of Outlander Blood of My Blood. So what did you think of this prequel? The show has already been renewed for a second season, and I, for one, am looking forward to seeing where they take the story next. I'm glad they found a way to incorporate time travel in such an unexpected way, and the idea of Jamie and Claire's parents being intertwined in such a profound way is really interesting. Any thoughts on where the story should go next? As always, if you appreciate what I do, leave a like and subscribe to my channel, and I will see you in the next video.